when I was a college student? We're good? I lived for one summer in Thailand. Now, it was awesome. It probably wasn't the typical reason a college student goes to live in some far-flung place for a summer. I wasn't there to party. I was actually studying, guys, don't make fun. I was majoring in Christian ministry in university. I was majoring in the Bible. I had this sense of call about ministry, but I didn't know exactly what that meant. I couldn't really figure out what exactly I wanted to do with that. And so I spent my summers in college in these different church contexts in different places. And one of those summers was in Thailand. And the team that was starting a new church there, they received me. They didn't quite know what to do with this American for just a couple of months, but they put me to work, right? And they put me to work in this university. They had built a partnership with the English department there at the university, just because this team was out in the community in all kinds of different ways, just serving with the community, uplifting the community, serving for the community, and hopefully opening doors for people who might be curious about who Jesus is or about Christianity. So they put me, because I'm an English speaker, in the part of this ministry at this English club, at this university, talking with English major students, talking with business major students who want to sharpen their English, and I was there almost every day, just building relationships with other students, hopefully opening the door to who Jesus is, to curiosity, piquing some curiosity about the church, about Christianity, right? And what struck me, I remembered that story this week, and it's interesting, it struck me how similar halfway around the world, all those years ago, in a different culture, in a different language, in a different context, the mission of the church was basically the mission of New City Church in Oakland, helping people to find and follow Jesus, getting out into the community, serving with the community, serving for the community, and cracking open that door, that window, just to say, who is Jesus? What has he done? Why does it matter? You know, as a church, we are in this series, Rediscover Jesus. Now, no matter where you are, you've already heard several people up here mention, if you're still finding Jesus, this is a place for you. Just trying to figure out who he is and what you think about him. If you're somebody who's been following Jesus for a long time, this is a place for you where you can deepen and you can make your faith have a real difference in your life. And we've been looking at this in this Rediscover Jesus series. We've been looking at all these encounters that Jesus has with different people. Maybe you've been here, maybe you remember a few of them. He heals a paralytic. These friends drop this guy from the ceiling and he heals him. He welcomes a prostitute who weeps at his feet. He told a parable last week about two lost sons. One is lost because he thinks he's so moral, and one is lost because he runs away from morality, and both of them miss the father. And Jesus, through all of these encounters, he opens a door for us. A window for us to see who he is. Now, again, that's what we're doing today. We're going to look at Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19. We're going to read the first 10 verses. If you're able, I know we've done a lot of standing, sitting. Let's stand while I read it, right? If you're able to stand up while I read this. Luke chapter 19, the first 10 verses. It says this. He, that's Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for Jesus was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So Zacchaeus hurried and came down and received Jesus joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. Jesus has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. This is God's word. You guys can have a seat. Incredible story. That last verse is very known, this mission statement from Jesus. The Son of Man, that's his self-title, his preferred way of referring to himself. He says, I have come to seek and save the lost. And here we have another encounter in this series of encounters that we've seen in the book of Luke, another encounter with Jesus, and how it really changes. It has real impact in real life for this guy named Zacchaeus. Now we're going to look at this today with one overarching question. Here's the question: can you encounter Jesus? Can you encounter Jesus like this? Or are these just stories for another people in another place in another time? Can you encounter Jesus? And we're going to look at this question through the lens of our main two characters. We've just got two characters in this story, basically. Zacchaeus and Jesus. All right? You with me? Okay. Let's do this. First, Zacchaeus. We got to ask, who was Zacchaeus? Well, right off the bat, we learned something about him, right? He is a tax collector. Now, today, you and I, we joke maybe about paying taxes. Who wants to pay taxes? Nobody wants to pay taxes. We have jokes about the IRS, whatever. So it's not necessarily liked, but it's nothing like people would have experienced tax collectors in the first century, like people would have experienced Zacchaeus, because it wasn't just the financial burden of taxes. There were two other components as well. There was a social component, and there was an exploitation component. And here's what I mean. People didn't like to pay taxes. There's the financial component. The social component is, how did Rome, who was so efficient in conquering so much territory, how did they manage that? How did they collect taxes? One of the ways that Rome was efficient in their conquering of so many different peoples and groups and ethnicities is that they kind of let these groups operate more or less culturally on their own in their villages and towns and cities like Jericho. The Jewish people were one of those people groups, one of many conquered by Rome. And if you let these people operate more or less culturally the way they want to, but under the authority of Rome, then it begs the question, how do you collect taxes from this ethnic group that's different than you? You find a cultural insider who's willing to turn on their own people. That's what tax collectors were. There wasn't just the financial burden, it was traitor. It was betraying your own people and giving money to the Roman overlords. And then there's the third component, the exploitation component. Rome said, how do we turn somebody that way? What's in it for them? We will overlook them cooking the books and charging extra taxes and keep it themselves. It was this perverse symbiosis between the Romans and the tax collectors. The Romans would turn a blind eye to the tax collectors stealing and taking extra off the top, and the Romans were happy about it because they got their taxes. Do you see? Tax collectors were reviled. They took taxes, they were socially outcast, and they exploited their own people. They were traitors and exploiters and cheats. This is the guy that we're reading about in this passage. I wonder, if you've read, not if, we've all read those headlines, those things in our news feeds about another bank that has failed. You know what I'm talking about? Some CEOs, some group of executives, they over-leverage other people's money, and then the bank fails, and everybody is left, all the regular people are left holding the bag. But what happens? The CEO bankers walk away with their golden parachutes with millions. When you read that story again, it will happen again. And that feeling you have, how can this be? How is it that we have some kind of system that permits this to happen over and over again, where the guys responsible walk away with the money and the guys not responsible are left with half their savings, right? That feeling you have would have been something akin to what people felt about Zacchaeus. Only much, much more, because they knew him, because he was in their community. And it doesn't stop there. What does it say about Zacchaeus? It doesn't just say that he's a tax collector. It says that he's what? A chief tax collector. And this is Jericho. This is this is a big city. Zacchaeus is a big deal. Zacchaeus would have been astonishingly wealthy from years of ruthlessly taking money from others. But what do we see from him? We see two things. First, he seeks earnestly. And second, he receives eagerly. I wonder if I can talk to myself too, a category in my mind for that ruthless CEO banker seeking Jesus earnestly. Because that's what we have here. Zacchaeus seeking earnestly, and Zacchaeus receiving eagerly. Look again at verses 3 and 4. Verse 3, Zacchaeus was seeking to see who Jesus was. Let's pause there. What an interesting turn of phrase. Not seeking to get a peek, not seeking to take a selfie with a celebrity passing by, seeking to know who Jesus was. He wanted to know who this guy was. Who is this Jesus? It's interesting, in the book of Luke, which we've been in this whole series, there are 6 different mentions of tax collector, and every single mention is positive. Guys, this is astonishing. For the first readers of this, they would have just been floored by that idea. Every time you mention tax collector, it's positive. There's a time when there's a group of tax collectors coming to be baptized. Imagine. There's another time when Jesus calls one of his 12 disciples from the tax collecting booth. Did you know that one of the 12 had been a tax collector? There's another time when Jesus compares the prayer of a tax collector in the temple to the prayer of a religious teacher. The religious teacher is praying loudly, and it's a prayer all about himself, about how great he is. It's not about God at all. And there's the tax collector in the shadow, in the corner. He can't even look up. And he beats his chest and he says, "Have mercy on me, a sinner." Every time Luke mentions tax collector, it's something, there's a positive spin on it, and this is no exception. And we can wonder, therefore, why does Zacchaeus want to know more about who Jesus is? Had he seen in this tax collecting community, this bubbling up, this revival, this curiosity about Jesus, does he know people who had been changed? Is that what's motivating him? It seems very likely. And he hears that Jesus is coming toward Jericho and making his way through, and he runs. Why? To see who he is. Verse 4, he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for Jesus was about to pass that way. Zacchaeus' earnest seeking of Jesus is not passive. Do you see this? It is active. He wants to get at the bottom of who is this Jesus. And he sees Jesus coming. He's making his way through Jericho. He can't get through all of the throngs of crowd. He's small in stature. We learn that. And so what does he do? He runs on ahead and he scrambles up a tree like a child. Like a kid. You know, Zacchaeus, we know that he's seeking earnestly because there is social cost to what Zacchaeus does here. You know, how much in a traditional culture like Zacchaeus's, he already had few friends. The friends that he would have had would have been other elites and people of means and of wealth and everything else, of status. He sets aside that status, that dignity, and scrambles up a tree just to get a look, to know who Jesus is. You know, today, if a mayor of a major city scurried up a tree to get a better look, you know, to get a better look at the marathon finish line, we're laughing already. We would tease, there'd be memes, there'd be animated GIFs, there'd be everything about that mayor, right? How much more in a traditional culture like the one Zacchaeus was in? He sets all that, he puts all that on the line to know who Jesus is. He seeks earnestly. But that's not all. He also receives eagerly. Amidst the crowd, Jesus making his way, there's people pressing in, hanging on Jesus' every word, and he gets to the tree, and Jesus looks up and names Zacchaeus and says, "I'm going to your house today." Then verse 6, what does it say? So Zacchaeus hurried and came down and received Jesus joyfully. What do we see from Zacchaeus? 2 things. When I say he welcomed Jesus eagerly, I mean that there is urgency and that there is joy. Both of those things we see in Zacchaeus. He is urgent. He hurries. When Jesus says, I am coming to your house to stay, we got to put ourselves in the ancient world. There are these hints in the text. I'm going to stay at your house. When the people looked on and grumbled and said, how can Jesus hang out with that guy? They said, how can Jesus make himself a guest in the home of Zacchaeus? In other words, this took time. You know, if you and I have coffee or a meal together, we can pop into a restaurant and pop out in 45 minutes, right? In the ancient world, it might have taken half a day just to walk to Zacchaeus' estate. It might take a day or two to prepare the meals, the kind of things you'd need to host Jesus and his disciples. This involved Zacchaeus' whole household, and he set aside everything and made a way for Jesus. When Jesus invites himself over, he's saying, Zacchaeus, today I'm going to lodge at your house. Jesus spent time with Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus opened up his schedule. He set everything aside. There is urgency and there is joy. Zacchaeus' eager reception matches his earnest seeking, doesn't it? It goes together. He seeks earnestly after Jesus, and then Jesus shows up, and he can't believe it. And he moves everything around in his joy, and he is urgent to make a way, to make room in his life for Jesus. That's Zacchaeus. Let's look at Jesus. We've got two characters. Jesus, he also does two things. He accepts radically, and what? He transforms thoroughly. Jesus accepts radically, and he transforms thoroughly. Jesus reaches the spot where Zacchaeus is up in the tree, and what did he do? Let's look at verse 5 again. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. Remarkable. Now, Zacchaeus, as we already mentioned, had paid a certain kind of social cost. The few friends he had would have now been teasing and mocking him, scrambled up a tree. And what does Jesus do? In front, just as Zacchaeus had paid a cost socially in front of everyone, Jesus, with the throngs of crowds around him, gets to the base of the tree and turns his attention to Zacchaeus and names him in front of everyone and says, Zacchaeus, today, you and me, we're hanging out. It's incredible. He flips upside down. He starts to absorb the social cost. By honoring Zacchaeus, what everybody else saw as a mockery, he turns into an honoring position. He says, Zacchaeus, he knows Zacchaeus' name. And he calls him out in a crowd that would do everything to avoid this guy. And a crowd that would do everything to walk miles around Zacchaeus' estate. Jesus says, I'm going there today. Jesus accepts radically, my friends. Jesus didn't send a disciple ahead of him to say, hey, catch up with Zacchaeus or another tax collector and say, when you get your act together, when you get your life together, when you're a little bit more moral, next time I pass through Jericho, maybe we'll talk. He approaches Zacchaeus, and what do we learn from this? Long before Zacchaeus ever thought to look for Jesus, Jesus was looking for Zacchaeus. He knew him. He cared about him. And he meets him exactly where he is and says, I want to be with you. Can you imagine? Do you have a category for that kind of radical acceptance? For the kind of person in our society that we just can't abide. Just that person. That's what we see from Jesus, his radical acceptance. You know, when I was in Thailand that summer, serving at that church in college, the student that I grew closest to, that I became friends with more than any other student, his name was Golf. If we have any Thai people in the house, you know Thai names can be really fun. His name was Golf. So we hung out all summer. We did extra, we just did all the kind of stuff that you would do as a college student. We just had a lot of fun. Near the end of my internship, nearing the end, I just asked Golf. I was like, Golf, man, we hang out. You kind of got to know me. I've kind of gotten to know you. You've been to some church stuff, and you've never expressed any kind of curiosity about Christianity or about Jesus. Why? I probably wasn't very artful with my question. I was just like, why? And Golf didn't even have to think about it. You know what he said? He said, you know, Luke, you grew up in a mostly Christian place, and I grew up in a mostly Buddhist place. And what I think is all these things are just teaching me to be a better person. All these different things are just different ways of teaching us to be better people. And you know, I did not know how to respond to Golf in that moment. I was majoring in Bible and Christian ministry, and he stumped me. But Golf, what he doesn't know is that he gave me a great gift that day. He sent me on this path. Like, what is different about Christianity? What is unique? What is distinctive? Are these things all the same, religious or philosophical or whatever? And right here, with Zacchaeus, with this story, and so many other countless episodes with Jesus, we have the answer to Golf's question, or Golf's assertion. Every system, every institution, every religion, every social order, all, if you boil it all down to its essence, is this fundamental thing. If you obey, you can be accepted. If you obey, you can be accepted. If you make the grade, you can get into college. If you make yourself sufficiently attractive enough, you can get the date. If you don't break the law, you don't go to jail. If you perform well enough, you get the promotion. You name the field, if you boil it all down, this is how the world works, right? This is every religion, every philosophy, every social order, every institution, everything except one. Jesus breaks in to what is normal for us as people, and he turns it upside down and he says, you are accepted. Now go obey. He turns it around, friends. This is what he does with Zacchaeus. He calls him out. He meets Zacchaeus where he is, exactly where he is. He accepts this radical acceptance, and it produces in Zacchaeus a transformed life. Jesus says, I accept you. You see, I don't have to be moral enough to make it to heaven, or moral enough to make it to transcendence or nirvana or whatever the religion says. No, Jesus says, I was moral enough when you were not. I accept you just as you are. I meet you where you are. And flowing from that radical acceptance, when the penny drops, you can ask other people in this room who have experienced this. When the penny drops and you discover that kind of love and that kind of acceptance of somebody who knows your mess better than you know your mess, and they still love and accept you, when that happens, you say, who else would I follow? What else would I obey? Friends, we are all following something or someone. We're all obeying something or someone. Why not obey and follow the one who has radically accepted us where we are? That's what happens to Zacchaeus. Jesus accepts radically. And second, Jesus transforms thoroughly. This acceptance produces transformation. Verse 8, look at this again. Zacchaeus and Jesus, they've spent some time together. Jesus is in Zacchaeus' household and on his estate. Maybe while dining, Zacchaeus stands and declares this change. Verse 8, he says, and Zacchaeus stood and said to Jesus, behold, Lord. Pause. Now Zacchaeus calls Jesus Lord. Incredible. Just some time with Jesus. Behold, Lord, half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. Guys, this kind of change. Here is a person who has systematically and ruthlessly constructed their whole life around the accumulation of wealth. They've compromised and sacrificed everything else, every other relationship. And this transformation is so fundamental, so thorough, that Zacchaeus is dismantling everything he made and rebuilding it on Jesus. Incredible. Zacchaeus would have known, the people around Zacchaeus in the household, the people around the dining table would have known, the people onlooking and grumbling and complaining about Jesus hanging out with the tax collector, they would have known the Old Testament law. And the Old Testament law required giving 10% to the poor. What does Zacchaeus say? I give 50%. Zacchaeus has captured, he's been changed, he's captured the radical love of Jesus and says, I want to be like that. Can I be like my Lord? The people around, Zacchaeus would have known, the people around Zacchaeus would have known, at the dining table, the people outside looking on and grumbling and complaining would have known the Old Testament law that says if you cheat someone, if you defraud someone, you pay them back plus 20%. What does Zacchaeus say? I pay back plus 400%. Guys, this is the kind of transformation that changed Zacchaeus' entire identity. You don't give away that kind of wealth without affecting your life. He downsized voluntarily, on purpose, because Jesus had gotten a hold of him. And because he said, who else would I follow? There's a moment in another scene when Jesus is with his disciples. And a lot of people run away from Jesus angry. Jesus' words just seem too extreme to them. And Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, will you also abandon me? And one of his disciples steps forward and says, Lord, you have the way of life. Where else would we go? That is someone who's experienced real encounter with Jesus. This is what we see with Zacchaeus. All of his wealth, all of his accumulation of status and power and stuff, he was like, it's nothing to me anymore. I want to be with him. Jesus radically accepts and he radically transforms. Jesus said to Zacchaeus, today I will take up lodging in your house. And you know what happened? Jesus took up residence in Zacchaeus' heart. Astonishing. Incredible. And it changed everything about Zacchaeus. He was a new person. The old had gone, the new had come. An authentic encounter with Jesus inevitably results in a changed life. You know, when we had those baptisms a few weeks ago, we just heard other stories like Zacchaeus's. An encounter with Jesus, an authentic encounter with Jesus, inevitably produces a changed life. It's incredible. Some of us know that experience, some of us know that change, some of us are in the middle of that right now, what Jesus can do when he is eagerly sought, when he is earnestly sought and eagerly received. There's this verse 10, I mentioned it earlier. It's so incredible. There's these times when Jesus gives kind of mission statements, what he's about, all at once, with a really succinct statement. And John, one time he said, I have come that they might have life and have it to the fullest. Another time in Mark, we're looking at this with our learning cohort, Exploring Christianity learning cohort, Mark chapter 10, I have come not to be served, but to serve, and to give my life as a ransom for many. And here we have one of these mission statements from Jesus, and he gives it in the presence of this tax collector. He says what? For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. This is what Jesus is about. You know, one time I was younger, just kind of getting started in my work and vocation and church ministry, and I overheard this kind of conversation after a church service. The pastor, the preacher, who was much older than I was, he delivered a message. It might have been on this very passage. I have no idea. I don't remember which passage. But there was a lady after service who went up to him, and she was so angry. She said, "How can you call people lost?" And you know what the pastor said? He was so good at listening. He said, "No, it wasn't me. It was Jesus that called people lost." Friends, the fundamental need of humanity is not more funding or more education or more political power. Jesus says the fundamental need of humanity is salvation. We need to be rescued. We need some external person to reach into our mess and pull us out. That's what Zacchaeus needed, and that's what he received. Jesus sought him, and he saved him. Rescue, salvation is what Jesus is about. Nothing less. It's his mission. And he was seeking you long before you even thought about seeking him. He came to seek and to save the lost. Now, back to our thesis question. Can I really encounter Jesus? I think the answer here, the answer in so many passages is an unequivocal yes. But I don't want to leave us with just kind of a blurry, so what? What's next? I want to give us some ideas. Maybe you're there and you're like, so what does that mean? How do I encounter Jesus? Just 2 ideas. I'm taking them right from Zacchaeus. These aren't original with me. First idea is just to set aside your pride. You know, this is one test. Are you seeking Jesus earnestly? Have you set aside your pride? You know, maybe setting aside your pride is very much like Zacchaeus. There's a social pressure. What might people think? What might your colleagues or family or friends think if they knew you were really pursuing knowing more about Christianity and Jesus? Set aside the pride. Maybe pride for you is anger with God. You know, I've been here. Is there something that has happened or that you perceive God has done, a way that he's abandoned or rejected you, and your answer is, fine, I'm going to abandon and reject God. Set aside your pride to seek him. Maybe for you, it's some skepticism about religion in general or Christianity in particular. And set aside your pride. Why would the only thing untouched, immune to your doubt, be your own doubt? Do you see what I mean? Apply the same rigor and skepticism to your own skepticism that you apply to Jesus. Set aside your pride. So that's first. Second, welcome with joyful urgency. It's interesting to think about how different this story would have been if when Jesus went up to Zacchaeus and he said, "Hey, Zacchaeus, today I'm coming to your house." If Zacchaeus would have responded, "Oh, Lord, I am flattered by that offer. How about my people get in touch with your people and we'll get something on the calendar in the next couple of months?" How different would this story have been? What does Zacchaeus do? He moves everything. How many things must have been on Zacchaeus' calendar that he eliminated to make room for Jesus? Get urgent about your relationship with Jesus. Move stuff around. But put the phone in another room. Find some other person here in our church and just say, "Hey, I just want to talk to more Christians." Be a little weird. Be urgent about knowing Jesus. Zacchaeus just wanted to know what? Who Jesus was. And it resulted in all of this incredible change in his life. Friends, it's the same for us. Many of us can share stories like Zacchaeus's. Set aside your pride. Welcome Jesus with joyful urgency. And don't miss this. Jesus does all the heavy lifting. He does the rest. He accepts radically. He transforms thoroughly. Jesus does what only he can do. He meets you where you are. He makes his home with you, and he transforms your life. Let's pray. Lord, sometimes I still can't believe How incredible your acceptance and love of me are. But it's true. Father, I pray for the people in this room who know that personally, truth with you, who have encountered you and been changed. I pray that you would fortify them in this world, and in their workplaces, and in their schools, and in their homes. And I pray for those in this room who are still just discovering who you are, or still have questions and doubts. Lord, will you meet them exactly where they are? Will you do what only you can do? And I pray that they would earnestly seek and make room for you. In your name I pray. Amen.